Trench, I got a quite a left field compliment a few weeks ago. Someone said to me when I released these conversations, they listen to them in 1x speed as opposed to 1.5x speed, which all the other conversations go in. So I took that as a great compliment, and I'm pretty confident, and I hope that will be at least a dozen or so people that will be watching this in 1x speed, because I'm delighted to have you on and talk to you about your background in betting.
I've used that backhanded compliment to people many times myself, but I listen to so many now that I'm sort of 1.5x for most things. So if you get a 1x, you should take it as the compliment it is, I would say.
Well, it was actually you who told me that, but I had yeah. So yeah, I didn't want to sort of put that up as the icebreaker. But so yeah, let's get straight into it then. So I understand you have, as a child, you into sort of like games and the normal sort of fun things that people did. I know that the Pinnacle founders were all big sort of games players as well. So there's obviously a connection in us betting folk. But like, can you remember the transition from playing games and what sort of games you played as a child into understanding risk management and ultimately sports betting?
Yeah. So my parents are completely I suppose a risk off, let's call it. But my grandfather on my mother's side was very risk on, and he loved games, and he only liked games where there was a betting component. But his games were bridge, cribbage, backgammon. And he would only play them even with, a 5-year-old child if there was like 1p's on the table and there was some sort of betting involved. To the extent that one time he said, jokingly, "So where's your money, kid?" And I was like, I don't have any. And he said, "Oh, so can we not play?" And he says, "Don't worry, we'll find something to gamble for." And I said, "Well, I've got nothing to gamble with." And he said, "Don't worry, what we'll do is I'll cut you a high card. So, whoever has a high card, for a punch in the nose." And then he feigns punching me right in the face, right there. It's like 70. I was like, whoa, like that. So yeah, he was avid, and he gambled right up until he died. He would go to the bookies every day to bet horses. He loved horses, and that was his thing. So so he very much told me. So his real passion was backgammon and the doubling dice. Backgammon without the doubling dice is an okay game. With the doubling dice, it's a brilliant game, and it brings in like some gambling theory into it. It's highly bravado kind of involved, really. And it's interesting that it's like massively popular in Turkey, for example, because the Turkish people just have naturally insane amounts of gamble in them. Whatever anyone says, they absolutely love it. So I grew up playing card games, and I loved card games, but never poker, never blackjack, no classic casino games. And I wanted to play bridge, and I never really had a good partner. But bridge can be a phenomenal betting game. And funnily enough, the founders of Pinnacle were really big bridge players, as well as playing backgammon and those other kind of games, interestingly. But then I suppose my little sort of brief sort of segue was I was a massive fan of Top Trumps. I've actually mentioned this story once before, probably about 8 years ago on a Business of Betting, back when Jake Williams did Business of Betting podcast. I love Top Trumps because you wanted to figure out what the best is. Yeah. And so you had to find out the best stat for each area for different things. Yeah. And that was sort of my first kind of like, let's put it in a spreadsheet, let's rank them. Right. And that was sort of a good mechanic for kind of the process evaluation of quality of things for betting purposes later on in life. But yeah, the game I fell in love with was a game called Magic the Gathering, which was sort of took the kind of Dungeons and Dragons style role-playing universe and put it into a trading card game. A lot of people of my generation played either maybe sort of Pokemon or maybe Magic, these kind of things. And it was a pretty high skill game. It had a lot of variance, randomness, a huge tilt element to it, but also a lot of skill. It helped if you could hold like patterns in your head, knowing other people's deck styles and what would possibly come next. All these elements that made it just a really challenging but rewarding game. Yeah. And yeah, it's funny because some of the people that I would then, when I worked at Pinnacle like 20 years later, were some of the best players in the game when I've been playing it. Yeah. And that was kind of surreal, really. But the great thing about that game in so many ways is basically just the mental muscle, the specific mental muscles that it made you exercise. Yeah. Because you were trying to probabilistically assess the likelihood of cards coming up you had to deal with the variance that like you could lose often, not because you played badly, but just because the randomness of a shuffled pack of cards, which, you know, as we know, that the psychology plays as big a role as the skill in so many ways. So yeah, so that was my that was sort of my first introduction to dealing with, I suppose, volatility. I hadn't really I had a very lovely, comfortable upbringing, so there was no real kind of like element of, you know, risk reward really around me growing up. But those games did provide that.
It's interesting. I think everyone remembers top trumps, and I've not thought about them for many years. But that whole thing that you've just described, it is like creating the EV of each card. You're looking down on whatever the topic is, top speed of the Ferrari, whatever it is, or acceleration. You're actually in your mind as a young child trying to work out which is the most value in that card without really knowing it.
And also, it had like lots of biases as well. So, for example, I think one of the absolute classic sets recognized is Supercars, the original Supercars top trumps, and kids always wanted to do horsepower or top speed, etc. They always wanted to quote those. And the reality is something car width or something like that. Maybe you may have a card that looks shit because it's a shitty car, but it happened to have some metric. So it's like, you know, it's right. Oh, I've got to think in relative terms here.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where the sort of the entry level players know what the best stat on each card is.
Yeah.
Then the next level player will like, well, I know that the second best stat on the card is like third ranked in the whole deck. So like people would sort of, there were levels to it essentially.
A bit of game theory.
Absolutely.
I'm going to take that to my nephews next time I see them, and maybe threaten a little punch on the nose there as well.
So, that's not modern parenting now, I dare say.
They're bigger than me now, so that's probably going to be the other way. Yeah. So do you remember when you sort of had your first bet on an actual sport?
I do. I was very, very late, I suppose, relative to a lot of these kind of betting fanatic sort of podcasts. I was 15, and it was a coupon in a betting shop, a small it was a village betting shop, like one betting shop in the village, and it was with a friend. And I did that thing, the sort of the fruit machine lurker thing, where I looked over and he would go, you know, what about this one? And I go, yeah, I think so. So he filled out the coupon. I, by being present, had equity in the bet. And so we went to the pub. It didn't win. And I was like, so, sorry for anyone's like, yes, when you live in the country, lots of underage drinking, I'm afraid. So
I love how that both of those things came very fluid to you, the betting and the drinking. Okay, so and then go on.
Yeah, but that then was like, so I sort of just dabbled a bit in it, but it didn't catch me. The bug didn't catch me there. Okay. And then at university, I did a little bit of betting on horses because I'd really sort of found out about rating systems. Yeah. And I'd found out about it in one of those kind of, it's one of those sort of janky old forums where it's like how to earn money on the side or whatever kind of things. And it wasn't actually an arbit, it was like a systems type thing. Back courses from this trainer or whatever. And I kind of went down that rabbit warren and I found out that people were sort of rating horses. And when you see something like a time form rating or a racing post rating, that brought me all the way back to top trumps. And I was like, oh, okay, so we know what's the best. And I loved the idea of, in sports generally, knowing who's the best at something. Yeah. And I loved that there was challenging context. So, for example, this would have been early noughties. Tiger Woods has won in 97 the Masters. And already the conversation is like, how can we compare Tiger Woods to Jack Nicklaus? And I love that kind of, I think it's very hard to answer authoritatively on these types of questions, but I love the idea of how do you contextualize performance across eras or across difficulties, these kind of things. Yeah. And I would later find out the phrase collateral form and how to evaluate horse races runs based on what they were running against, the conditions on the day, all this kind of stuff. So I thought but then the beauty of then encapsulating all that wizardry into one single number, I kind of fell in love with that. And so I had a period of basically backing horses with the highest number in races. Yeah. And unsurprisingly, did not make any money out of this process. But that was sort of my first teaser. And then I worked in my final year at university. I worked at what was going to be my then first job, which was for taking bets over the phone for IG Sports, back when IG had a sports spread betting desk.
That was your first job out of uni?
Yeah.
And what did you do at uni?
History.
Yeah. helpful.
So
So,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
And so you're a telephone trader at IG?
Yeah, so started out just literally taking bets over the phone. Back then, anyone who worked for any of the major spread betting firms knew that it was an environment of unrestrained thinkers and characters, shall we say. And it paid well. Like betting notoriously pays badly, but the spread firms back then, relative to like your Ladbrokes and your William Hills, who did have spread betting divisions briefly, but anyway, the spread betting paid a lot better, and it had this kind of, it didn't pay as well as like a proper city job, but it was okay. And so I was there.
Was it heavily bonus based?
It was quite bonus based. IG also had what at the time, looking back, was yeah, rather feather your own mattress shares scheme as well,
Right.
which I wish I had partaken much more of. But there we go. But yeah, so it was but yes, I was surrounded by these incredibly big characters. I'd always been someone who loved being around big personalities. And so I was always like, well, this is barely working. This is just having fun, basically, and chatting about stuff with people. And yeah, I then found out that the spread firms back then, there was a lot less just pen and pencil. Oh, I think the number's this. There was a lot more. We've calculated the number should be this. They already had. Spread betting went very early into live betting, which meant you had to have a model to do live betting with any real seriousness. And once you had a model, you had to find inputs. And once you had to find inputs, you had to create ratings. So now I'm back in like this idea. I really sort of fell in love with this idea of evaluation of, competitors and these things. So yeah, and the most, I suppose, technical wizardry to me at the time was the golf model they had, which was back then like really fun. It was a really good Monte Carlo simulation of golfers' scores. It simulated the cut correctly. It evaluated the probability of them finishing top 10, 20, all these things that people now just think is a given when they look at something like a data golf website or whatever. But back then was like, we were up against bookmakers who were literally looking at last week's odds and going, well, this week they were 12 to 1 last week. They're not that good at this course, 14 to 1 then, I guess. And we were using this. So there was sort of a golden era where the golf traders at IG were also making a lot of good money on the side. And so I was like, I like golf. I played golf. I was like, well, that's the department for me. And that's where I ended up. After I said, it's quite funny because I went and said, I don't suppose there's a chance that there might be a job going. And I think at the time they were kind of like, you sure? You're going to get a pretty good degree from LSE and, is this for you? But yeah, no, I said, yep, absolutely for me. And yeah, so I started out, and then for 6 years I did some rugby as well, because the public school boy, you've got to lean into your areas basically.
And you ended up responsible for the growth sports as well there.
Not there. No, I literally just did golf and rugby there. The growth sports role was Pinnacle, which was in the last few years.
Yeah.
But again, even something like rugby, which was slow, I suppose, industry wide to be heavily modeled. They already had, good time decay models with probability of different scoring functions throughout the game and stuff. They already had done a lot of that work. It was funny because we had access to some of the hardware and software programming power of the IG's financial department, which was like pretty heavy duty. Yeah. So if ever we came up with something in a spreadsheet, it would then be like weapons grade C# into something that would work really well. Yeah. And the real, I suppose, the peak pleasure period at IG was we were market making into Betfair as well.
Yeah.
And we had a good deal on sports where they had no volume. So we paid zero commission on sports where they agreed that they had nothing. Wow. And no one was market making rugby. And we said we'd do that. And so we got zero commission on that. And spread betting's niche. So I could do a Magners League, as it was called back then. Was it Pro Rabo? I don't know what it's called now, but the Welsh, Irish, and Scottish League on a Friday night, and it was often on it might even be on BBC Wales or something like that, and you get like a handful of spread bets. Yeah. But when you're into the exchange, there's always a chance to put up an ARB. There's always a chance to get some sort of business going. So it really changed the pleasure of the job in so many ways for even sort of minor events. And the moment you were able to trade, I remember people chatting about this, like, what was your performance this year? And you'd be like, oh, I made this. And then it'd be like, Yeah, but what did you make on Betfair? It became the defining skill element of what
Right.
we were doing when we were market making, and that really made me fall in love with market making and bookmaking as opposed. I've still probably to this day only like betting, but I love making markets. That's the real pleasure for me, I suppose.
Yeah. So did the public school rugby union, presumably, did you have state school lads doing the league stuff, or was it just didn't even bother trading that?
Well, no. We did have we had an absolute. So by the time I left, we had. Funny enough, he would become the head of football in the end, but he was an excellent rugby league judge, and he was from Essex, so not a northerner. And he really just fell in love with the game and the sort of the minor nuance of league, like the sort of the handling skills, these things. And his first, but of course, he grew up literally in a bookmaker. His father owned a betting shop, and he and his brother both worked at IG, and they were just exceptional, natural, intuitive bookmakers, great betting minds and great bookmaking minds. And he fell in love with rugby league because they used to have, I don't know if they still have it, but the top Aussie team would come over and play in the UK one game, or a series, maybe a series of games. And he'd basically followed the game, and they would sort of chalk it up like these teams were remotely comparable. And the Australian teams were just infinitely better, basically, as long as they weren't actually still drunk, which they often were, sort of fairly boozy trips. But as long as they weren't actually drunk when they hit the pitch, they should demolish them. And so he would got his first real great edge of betting these Aussie teams when they came over to England. So that also helps you love of a game. When you start winning money on it, that doubles your love for the game.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he did that. But to be fair, his brother did greyhounds. So yeah, Essex bookmaker's son does greyhounds. That fits nicely, I think.
Yeah. So there's quite a few sports there, and at quite a sort of deep level. So is there one sport that you would say, if you could look back, and I'm presuming this is going back 20 years, so if you could sort of batch up the last 20 years of your sports bets, and I know you like the market making side more, but what would be your most successful sport? If you had to say gun to head, I can give you one tip on something, or one tip historically that you've just said, look, I knew this was going to happen. What sport would that be, or even what bet would that be?
It's definitely golf is definitely the sort of the sport I probably have had most personal success on.
Okay.
And if you wanted a sort of a perpetual angle as to where the most money overall, I suppose, or the most success we had, is because we focused a lot on in running. For many, many years, people underevaluated the leader of golf tournaments. Quite simply, after the third round, the person leading the tournament was undervalued. And this, interestingly, was sort of also the case, actually, with betting football outrights. So if you got to Christmas and a team was leading the league, they were often undervalued, particularly if they weren't, even more so if they weren't a big name. And I consider that sort of one of the classic sort of mental cognitive biases was everyone remembers Kevin Keegan's Newcastle not winning the league, having been ahead at Christmas. And so therefore you almost well, that's how we should bookmake this. And that's probably not incorrect. It's probably correct to have shorter prices on the chasing pack, because that's who people want to bet. They don't want to bet 1.5 or 4 to 6 or whatever. They want to bet the 7 to 2, the 4 to 1 to chase them down. And it was very much the same case at golf tournaments, especially if there was a player that wasn't well known. They were leading by a shot. The assumption was they will collapse. They do not have the mental stones to do this, and so that's what will happen. So so that was I suppose a perma angle for a long time. It's a lot of it's, as exchange has got more and more liquid, it kind of filtered out a lot. But that was definitely the one. In terms of one single bet of a golf tournament, do you know what? It was probably, you could pick them out. There was a period where it became obvious that Europe was putting so much effort into the Ryder Cup. And there was that period where they just absolutely hammered the shit out of them, basically. And it was really obvious that the Americans just couldn't fucking get up for it. It's still a bit the same. And people were still sort of pricing up based off, well, these Americans are like this many of the top 20 in the world rankings, so surely they've got to be, and it's just turns out that if you turn up to a team sport and couldn't give a crap, that is a That's a cross in one of the boxes next to you. So I'd say that kind of Celtic Manor, Ryder Cup, that kind of era of Ryder Cups was just a case of we always were like, they haven't made this short enough, really. Like they haven't factored in the changing in the wind of how this competition works now. And I think also there's something about it was just Tiger Woods' name's on the team sheet, right? Yeah. How bad can these fuckers be? You know, and it's like it turns out not even the great man can turn you around.
So what did you follow the betting this weekend with Fleetwood and Rose? Because that was crazy.
I kind of have it. I had it in the background of my mind. So I good friend of mine at Pinnacle actually was on Justin Rose and had a very very happy day. It's I found Fleetwood's fascinating because Fleetwood's the one where we always talk about do sports, is bottle a factor? Yeah. And the reality is that I never understand that question because it's like asking people, do you think being nervous is something? It's like, well, of course, you've all been nervous about it. Of course, it's a thing. It's a matter of assessing how much does it impact top level performance, basically, and quantifying it. That's the thing. Like people sort of make it out like there's either people who aren't nervous at all or there's people who are. It's like, no. And Fleetwood's getting to this point now with that many top 10s on the PGA Tour where those sample sizes are almost creeping in here, which is unheard of, really, statistically analyzing something like leading golf tournaments or being at that end. So there was always, I sort of had this, I don't know, and you're just thinking to yourself, oh, Tommy, because it's the most likable, probably the most likable professional golfer who plays at the moment. Right. It's like, oh, Tommy, please just unlock the whatever the key is. And just sort of waking up to that, I was kind of like,
I watched it. I wasn't following the betting, but there must have been just a 90 degrees, 180 degrees switch in the odds because he looked comfortable and then he looked nervous and the shoulders slumped and it was literally a 30-second window. You're like, oh no. And it was on the 17th hole or whatever it was. And it was so close. But what Rose did was absolutely extraordinary as well. It was a brilliant tournament, that final round. So a golfing trader I knew had a theory. I wonder what you think of this one. And this was, again, 20 years ago on the exchange. After 2 rounds to late, so it sort of it's at odds with your support of the leader after 3 rounds. But he was always laying the top 3 after 2 rounds, and he said that was just a blanket success. So this could be like a massive swing in that 3rd round where both those things can be true.
Yeah, I think there's. So quite often you'd have some sort of draw bias. Quite often people were at the top of the leaderboard after 2 rounds due to some degree of positive variance they'd experienced in course conditions, etc. So, quite often you get that situation where top players have maybe had a tough draw and they're lying just off the pace. And now we can factor in the fact that for a lot of players, there's kind of this mental reset after the cut. If you're the kind of players that are playing for a wage and suddenly you've made the cut, you've already in a place where you're going to pick up a check, you feel, if you're leading the tournament. So I think you can factor in a lot more psychological factors and come up with that kind of fade away. And the classic one would also be sometimes you get a player who in the second round, like so the first round, 68, second round, 62. Yeah. And there was this big debate of like, what is the regression after shooting a distinctly lower round? Yeah. And how much did the market over incorporate? Fucking hell, this guy's good. Yeah. And it's like, well, we can all have a hot putter kind of this sort of thing. So I would definitely say that there is definitely, I would feel less comfortable probably blanket betting it, but I definitely see how it would produce a lot of instances where that happens. Yeah. It's always player dependent, I guess. But I can definitely see how, there's a lot of times where the leaderboard says these players have played best, second best, third best, fourth best, and it's lying to you. It's like the expected goal. You think this team has won easily. Expected goals tells you actually they were very lucky. I think the thing that after 2 rounds leaderboard can actually be a product of quite a bit of luck sometimes, and therefore fading that is.
I think he also. It was probably like the novelty of being able to do that for the first time on the exchange. Previously you couldn't do that. So I think it being a nice idea coupled with the vehicle to do it made it perhaps more valuable in his mind than it was. So I've heard you say, and I think this is one of the most important pieces of advice for any sort of new person to betting, is that you can do everything right and still not get the result. So in your experience, is there a standout moment where you think you've done everything? You've talked about the golf successes, but where you've done everything, all your due diligence, all your analysis before placing a bet, and just the gods haven't been with you?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, a lot of the times, so there's times where I've, like anyone, I've just, I think I've done everything right. I've been sloppy. I've forgotten something. Though those undoubtedly happen. But there have been times where I've really assessed everything, and a bad bounce has, undone me somewhere. And I think quite often, do you know what? I think the things that sort of undo me is informational angles. So I would get some information regarding, because I used to bet quite a few, essentially one-on-one sports, so snooker, darts, tennis, these kind of things, because I liked evaluating individuals more than I liked evaluating teams.
Yeah.
And those sports, particularly darts and snooker, for example, you'd get information that was definitely an angle, but it fell into you as someone who loves boxing and loves boxing betting, that there's these things where it's like, well, how much do I evaluate the recent divorce, or how much do I evaluate, the dog that's just died, or whatever it may be. And so there's times where I feel like I've had the information, I've really chewed through, like, how much should it evaluate or rest of it. And then it's just not done. It's literally zero impact. You thought to yourself, there's no way this person will be in the right frame of mind. And it turns out the professional sports people sometimes really can just shut that shit out, it turns out. And they fucking absolutely just blitz it. So I think those are the ones that do that. And also, I remember, so information now is so easy on the internet. But I remember I used to be able to get, and some wise old head in the trading room say, beware the injured golfer. But I used to be quite good at finding in sort of minor, like, I don't know, like the Joburg Chronicle or whatever, you used to be able to find out someone saying like, oh, I've got a slight hip injury or whatever, these kind of things. And of course, I go on the match bets, find them, like, yes, And I want to pretend that I am break even on those bets. I certainly know I'm not in profit. But I'm probably slightly down. In fact, my very first ever spread bet was opposing an injured Jim Furyk in the Nedbank in South Africa with SpreadX. Right. Yeah. Open the account, rubbing my hands with like Furyk was like spread prices for people who don't know, four. Sell at 4, buy at 7, 3-point spread on the 15-3 or whatever golf matches. And 10-5. And obviously Furyk hobbled round, and because of the nature of his low variance game, got like a par round. And the good player I'd opposed him with, who I can't remember, just had a fucking shit show, just shot like a 78 or something like that. And I got absolutely, my very first bet, absolutely, I was like there, like a poor kind of novice trader thinking, oh God, I got it. And everything was on credit back then. Oh, the days of credit, so I there, like, and funny enough, quite rightly, SpreadX 9 a.m. on Monday were like, oh, hello, sir. You're going to pay now. Like, they were straight on, quite rightly. So no slack for me. I imagine no slack for anyone known to be working in the industry. Those are the moments where I felt like, oh, I've got the best of this, and then it turns out that those subjective angles, they're still, I highly in the day of like heavily automated, systematized odds compilation and so on. I highly recommend following these even more than ever, but getting the number right, I would rather find lots of them and stake them small and even rather than load up on them, because sometimes they're just so tempting. Sometimes, like, someone told me the story that not Ronnie O'Sullivan, Jimmy White turned up to a snooker match the following day after he'd literally that night his flat had burnt down. It was on fire when he was in it, and he turned up literally at this match like with nothing but his cue and like some smoke sodden whatever like that. And Jimmy did not win that match. Right. And so you hear these things and you think, fuck, it's like the absolute information is riches. And then, invariably they're the ones that come back and bite you horribly, I think.
It's exactly the reason I joined Twitter about 15 years ago, because I saw David Hay was fighting one of the Klitschko brothers in Germany, and he was tweeting out that they've moved my hotel room, I've got a terrible. They've downgraded me. There's no mattress on my bed. It's just springs. And he was tweeting this like the day before the fight or at weigh-in or something. I was like, this is such important. Like we're literally getting a live feed from the boxer himself. And normally the press conferences, they say best camp ever. Couldn't be in better shape. This is a good fight of my life. The reality is he's sleeping on spring bed. And so yeah, I just thought it was fascinating that you could get it straight from the athlete themselves. But again, like you say, some of these things about how important are they? It's hard to quantify the value of knowing. So Fleetwood, yeah, that was a tough beat for him at the weekend. Djokovic talks about it. So Djokovic is one of these guys who's got a iron will personality, but he says I'm completely nervous. I'm thinking about the mistake I've made, the overhead that I just shanked. But he says it's not about not feeling it. It's about how quickly I can move on and forget the fact that I'm feeling it. So this thing of like you say, there's no such thing as not being nervous or not being human. It's about how you move forward from getting out of those things.
He's a fascinating one. Again, this is a great one where we project our own prejudices in many ways. But do you remember the time when Djokovic came out and said he was vegan?
He still is, isn't he?
Well, yeah, I mean, but when he first came out and said that he had transitioned to a vegan diet.
Okay.
And this was at a time when veganism was certainly not on the trend curve that it is now.
Yeah. Okay.
And people were literally going like, "Well, you what? What, professional athlete
Right.
without animal protein?" Like literally, and I remember there were literally people thought to myself, "Look, this is one step from like rubbing crystals." Like, and there were literally people who were like, "Well, we've got to take this on." Like he's experimenting with weird shit now. He's lost it. And I remember people literally just being like, it's so funny how it's funny how information can also be like you're so looking for something an edge that you can sort of overwork it. But I mean, was it now it's sort of like so Tom Brady, I think certainly for the Tampa Bay Super Bowl and for probably a few more, had been vegan for quite a while.
Right.
And I think at Birmingham, maybe he's like completely taken over the nutrition because he's got that documentary out now of him, like being part of the ownership team of Birmingham Football Club. And I think he like very much got into the nutrition element. But I can just imagine that if Twitter was in that when Arsene Wenger banned ketchup at Arsenal, I can just imagine if Twitter was around then and people were going like, "Fuck, that's going to ruin team morale. I'm opposing Arsenal for the next 6 games. No problem there. No ketchup. I mean, how the fuck can they win?" People just love that little informational angle.
I didn't realize there was a negative backlash about Djokovic going vegan back then, but yeah, I see what you mean. There's they would look for anything to say, right, there's a change or like, woo woo. What?
Yeah. Did David Hay go vegan towards the end?
I think he did a lot with his. I don't know. I mean, I'd be amazed if he did, but I know he was very into his nutrition. Certainly, I don't know if he went vegan. Maybe he did. So you talk about these sort of the one-on-one sports, the darts, the snooker, the tennis. Are you big into the boxing?
So I love the sport, and I do also. So I mean, I'm like all those fucking boring wankers of my so I love thinking about the Eubank Ben era and British boxing and like watching huge ITV fights and stuff like that. And I really got into so I was very much a hardcore follower of Nassim Hamed. I don't know if that movie's any good, by the way. Pierce Brosnan is anyway, never mind. Yeah. Right. The Hamed era, I was very into it, and Hatton then came like just after that. And so that Ricky Hatton period, I was like, I suppose, really in and invested. Yeah. And of course, the Tyson return sort of like circus, I kind of was. But then I kind of lost a little bit. I found it because I was in IG and spread betting. And you go like, all right, well, where's the Excel file for boxing then? Yeah. And they'd be like, well, there isn't one. Yeah. And it's like, we've got one guy who knows boxing. And the funny thing is that guy would then call other people who worked in boxing gyms and knew boxing. And they would just talk about how they thought the fight was going to go. They'd build the narrative about the fight. And then the prices would almost come out of your arse. Not in a bad way, but, that's sort of, there wasn't like, how do we simulate the fight? You can almost certainly do these things now. But even then, I would say, how often is the simulation producing something that's good or not? I don't know. Sometimes, dump it all into a, random forest machine learning, who knows, whatever. But anyway, it wasn't done like that back then. And so I shied away from the betting on it because I was kind of like, oh, I like something with 4 decimal places after it, and this is not it. So I just watched it for the pleasure. But these guys knew boxing, so if they said, you want to bet this to go to a decision or whatever, I'd be like, fine, blindly. Both the guys who did it actually they worked in customer services at IG, and they both were like boxing gym regular, as in like they trained in that kind of like Bermondsey, Millwall kind of area. Like they sort of went to proper boxing gyms, and they knew their onions. They watched all the fights. They would buy, like, dating everyone here, like buy VHSs, like get the old tapes of fights that weren't like shown. Because back then, HBO used to show some incredible fights in the US that you couldn't get in the UK. So you used to have to mail off and ask people to like send these kind of things. So so boxing was there, appealing to watch. Although I felt I probably, like many people, got disappointed by, I suppose, the way the heavyweight division went, and it sort of, I kind of lost a bit of its luster for me. I still quite like going to like York Hall and watching the watching the Travellers fight and things like that. But yeah, no, I for me it's I have I'm not someone who's going to cry about the potential dangers of boxing. I'm afraid I love the spectacle of violence at the end of the day, and yeah, so it's something I always enjoy watching if there's a good fight, and I enjoy also mixed martial arts as well.
I think we've just got our clip. I think we've just got our clip that we're going to post on the socials. I love it.
Yeah.
Dead straight. I love the spectacle of violence that's going on. So I actually like that element of the boxing side of the betting, because there is no modeling, there is no data, there is no 4 decimal places. It's literally, if you're correct to an integer, you're doing well. So and I still think it's the case. There's Moses Atuma's fighting this weekend against Dillian White. Now, one of the leading bookmakers on the UK high street had him as a 3-1 on favourite 6 months ago. He's now, I think, 14-1 on. Like, it wasn't that extreme. It wasn't 3-1 on, but the shift has been monumental. And when that price came out, it lasted about 3 hours. But I still think it is. It's an individual who's coming up with an opinion, whether discussing it with other people or not. There's no amount of data he's plugging into any sort of machine to get that price out, because the prices are often just so different from what they end up being.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the one thing I don't even know if this comes into consideration with these fights, but these it's Riyadh, right? It is a Riyadh fight.
Yeah.
Is these because I remember the big thing with darts before people really. So there's a great website called Darts Database that used to track how much money players made on floor versus TV events. And there became very obvious bias that certain players could play in front of the cameras and certain couldn't on darts. Yeah. With boxing, do you think that there are some people who need a bit of a crowd, or 100%. Really? Right. Okay.
No, definitely. So that I don't know the number on it, but anecdotally, the number of fights that go the distance in Riyadh is significantly different to a normal sample. I'm convinced of it. And there was a bill. It might have been in New York, or it might have been in Riyadh, or it might have been in New York. They put a bill on in Times Square, and there was just zero atmosphere. So it was either there or Riyadh. 7 fights in a row all went the distance. There was like, I think Canelo Alvarez, the biggest name in boxing right now, threw the lowest number of punches that have ever been recorded in title fight. So like, absolutely, the atmosphere thing is definitely a factor.
Do you score all fights yourself? So you have a catalogue of all your scores of all the fights.
Yeah. So I'm not as nerdy as I used to be, but absolutely, because I can't have it. Boxing scoring is so subjective, and it's so you think you've got a one-sided fight, and then you add up your round scores, and actually it's a bit closer. But I will never say I think he won that or she won that if I haven't got my own scorecard to say I scored it 115, 113. Here are the rounds I gave. And actually on our website, we've got an interactive scorecard, and you don't just put in your scores 10-9, 10-9, 10-8, whatever. You rate your score for every round, high, medium, or low. So at the end of confidence rating in your score. So if it's a close round, you go 10-9, but I'm low confidence at the end. When you've got your total, it will say, yeah, you scored it 116, 112. But if you take in the low confidence round, you could have it a bit closer. So don't go shouting on social media that it was a robbery, because your own scorecard has it actually quite close.
What I find, so already anyone who understands boxing scoring and how it's done sort of by the actual judges can sort of interact with that quite easily. What I find interesting is people who maybe are less experienced, and the idea of, round, what I call sort of the Nando scoring. Was it a tie? Was it a slight win for this guy, slight win for this guy, or a strong win for this guy, strong win for that guy? And I used to think to myself, well, this is a bit imprecise.
Yeah.
But as data science, one of my most interesting data science articles I read was people forget that Netflix used to ask you for a rating out of, I believe, 5.
Yeah.
And it changed it to literally just thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yeah.
And people were like, well, what the fuck does that? I mean, how on earth can things either be good or just bad?
Yeah.
And they spoke to the data science team at Netflix, and they said, the end goal here is to create an algorithm that feeds people stuff that they will enjoy based on what they've enjoyed previously. Yeah. And we found that just the binary yes, no produces better, more pleasurable outcomes for consumers on the algorithm than when we rate things out of 5. And I was like, so the less granular rating system produced actually a good result.
Wow.
So I then sort of found myself thinking like, so sometimes if you've got enough historical data to contextualize like what good win per round or bad win per round is, because I find that so funny, because people will be like, when you first ever watch boxing, people like go, I mean, fucking hell, that's 10-8. And you're there thinking, that sounds quite close. Well, sorry, I don't understand. And then you're like, people explain boxing scoring to you, and you're like, okay, right,
Yeah,
so,
well, it's the whole thing of that you can win a round, you can win 3 minutes of that round and you get 10-9, or you can win 1 minute 31 seconds of the round and you just nick it, or you just do a little bit more and you get 10-9. It's not, it's 12 independent contests, and it doesn't matter if you win 100 meters by a second or by 0.001 of a second, you still just won the 100 meters. That's how it's that's what you got to get a head around it. But yeah, I still see people who I know are good boxing judges who score rounds even, and that is a massive no-no as well. If you can find a winner, you've got to give it a 10-9. But these 10-10 rounds will just make the scorecard just look wrong, and they're to be avoided as well. So do you I don't want to get into the sort of the politics of betting, because everyone's talked about that for hours on end, and they still do. But how many books do you think you've been restricted by? Do you still have any of the sort of the big ones that will let you get on?
So I can comfortably say that I have been restricted less. So some that I've had just outright. But now there was a period where bookmakers would actually close you completely.
Yeah.
And now now more commonly, I think it's more commonly they limit you to just sort of the penny or whatever. Yeah. But anyway, I had some accounts closed, but there are still bookmakers out there, because I'm not a big stakes bettor at all. I've never professed to be. I've never, in all my media times, I've never professed to be a professional gambler or someone who made fortunes from gambling at all. So the reality is that, and also I've always enjoyed odds compilation or handicapping, or however people want to call it, form reading. And the reality is that you used to, and still I think do, if you're picking out prices, if you're pricing things up yourself and you're betting into markets that are painted across, the same price everywhere, you get a longer leash than if you're only picking out best prices or steamers or ARBs or whatever it may be. If you're playing the market against the bookmakers, they feel kind of defenseless at times, rightly or wrongly, but whatever. Whereas if you are just like rock solid, when I say rock solid, as in uniform pricing, and then you bet something. And also, like, I bet a lot of golf, and the reality is that golf used to have a much more laissez-faire attitude towards restrictions. And it's only really when there was a surge in place market differential, basically sort of arbing the place on exchanges versus, and especially with extra places being as the marketing tool for golf. It was only really when that sort of started to ramp up and people realized, I think the problem was that at one point they started having people open accounts and betting 10 golfers each way with them. Sky Bet's gone 8 places. Someone's opened a brand new account and they've max bet each way 10 golfers. And the reality is that the man, quote, man or woman on the street, does not bet golf tournaments like that.
Yeah.
They bet a couple of players, maybe 3 players. The classic, I think the old Racing Post articles used to be called things like 3 off the tee, things like that. Yeah. And it was like, there would be just 3 players normally, and people would go like, I remember having these conversations with sort of ye olde school punters, be like, well, I may as well back half the field. Like if you bet like 5 golfers. So like the idea is that most people don't come on and just straight away back 10 golfers each way. It's not normal, normal square punter behavior. So I think that meant that now golf restrictions happen with far greater frequency. But for me, if I'm there having 25 each way on a golfer that I make 40 to 1 while the market's 80 to 1, but everyone is 80 to 1, those accounts don't get us, and if it's not an ARB, those accounts don't get much get much flack really. And rightly so. I don't think that kind of business should because the reality is that then it becomes a question of my mental fortitude to ride losing runs. Because if you're backing 80 to 1 shots, there's going to be some losing runs. So, and I always think that is, if you've got a cost base as a bookmaker, so certain sports cost more to offer than others. Golf, pre-live golf, live golf data is expensive. Pre-live golf is one-man job at a bookmaker. It's cheap to offer. You can afford to ride out all these poor buggers who, get lucky, but then go on a losing streak and then just give up on golf betting altogether. Even if they were on the right track, they give up because I just can't deal with this. I've gone 6 months and I'm losing. I can't do the next 6 months and risk the chance of doing a whole year losing. That would just beat me. So always sort of factor in that if you can afford to go head to head on terms of like mental fortitude with punters, you should always do it. But unfortunately, you can't afford it in certain sports because of the assorted costs related to offering that sport.
So Trench, do you have bets now where you will put none of your grey matter into it, and you just want to have a fun bet because you're watching something or you're going to an event, you're down at the York Hall or whatever it is, and you just want to have a fun bet? Or does every bet, be it £1, 20 quid, whatever it is, have to have a little bit of thought behind it? Can you have a bet for fun with no thought?
So I have a bet. I suppose the equivalent of my fun bet is that I like betting now just really only on significant events where, and I enjoy big events, whether it's a Wimbledon final or the Masters or whatever, because I quite enjoy still reading content. I have my favorite writers, content providers, and I like reading up a whole melange of stuff and trying to play the mental game of assimilating all that information. And then I just try to think, what is the crowd betting and what is the contrarian bet? And that is, so you may say, well, that could be considered, I suppose, slightly more sophisticated and not as fun. But to me, that is fun, trying to establish what, I mean, in American circles, the public side or whatever, I like trying to think to myself, what is the overarching narrative to this Wimbledon final, this big fight? Do I agree with that narrative? If yes, maybe I just watch it. But if I disagree with the overarching, so-and-so is the greatest of all time, they can't be beat, and I think to myself, well, I don't know. I think maybe they have over-exaggerated that. And those bets are genuinely fun to me because I've refused the lifetime instinct to open a spreadsheet. And instead, I've just sort of tried to use my own. And it's humbling also because, it's really hard to bet like that unless you've got very good intuition for it. And I do not have that natural intuition, but I enjoy the challenge of it, I guess.
Yeah. So it's never just randomly throwing darts, even if it's a quick bit. There's always something in there where you are thinking. Yeah.
I think when I've had a few drinks, you get that. So I mean, those are the only times when and it brings me right back to some. People will think this is probably a bit tragic. Some of the happiest moments I had was when I was like 15, 16 in the pub, round an old Barcrest fruit machine, all of us cheering on the fucking jackpot, like 3 of us, 4 of us, all playing the fruit machine. If it jackpots, double 15 rollover, whatever, 30 quid, 30 quid's paid for all our nights because booze was cheap, whatever. That is like an incredible communal sense. So if I'm with other people who have more gambling than me and we're watching a game and it's a cricket game and so-and-so, someone's like literally demolishing the bowling attack and someone goes, it's going to get a fucking ton here. Should we check what price a century is? And you'll be like, yeah, go on, why not? Let's see what it is. And you'll be like 3 to 1, 3 to 1. And then you get this kind of like almost, even with so really you can always tell the fucking superior syndicate owners because they just can't have these bets because they're too serious sometimes. But you'll get sort of my level people who know something about betting, but it's just freeing to be like, fuck this. I'm gonna have the most stupid, exactly what the bookmaker wants me to do bet, and the joy of winning those bets when you know you've taken like miserable value about something that's incredibly just juiced to the max by the bookmaker, and it still comes home. Yeah, it feels fantastic.
I've got no shame in admitting in that situation, if I was in that group and I thought this player was going to score a ton, what I would do is go, I reckon it's a 5-1 shot. I want to back him at 5-1. I look online and I see it's 3-1. I'll back him anyway. I don't mind saying I'll do that. You know, sometimes it doesn't have to be so serious. So there's the other segue. We talk about having a few beers. At the start of July, you and I were having a few beers, and I said to you that the monthly results of the David's Daily service that I put on my website were returning minus 10% ROI. So we're losing at 10% in June. And you said something to me on the lines of, well, July is probably going to overperform. Correct me when I've finished the question.
Yeah.
July is probably going to overperform. And I was like, surely the model's in for about 10% positive long term, but we're minus 10 in June. I went away thinking, surely July is not going to overperform, because that's like saying, if you see a load of reds on a roulette wheel, you then black's more likely, which I know is not true. But July, over 100 bets, I know it's not a huge sample, but still, July finished at 30% ROI. So at the end of the month, I thought of you in that conversation. I was like, right, if somebody had taken that advice of like increasing your stakes after a bad run to somehow optimize an inevitable good run. Now, talk to me about why that is nonsense, or why there's anything in that.
So I think it's both. So the reality is that if you've had 10 heads in a row, then the likelihood of, it being heads again hasn't changed.
Yeah.
However, that is a perfectly balanced, random, probabilistic event. And we're assuming that David's Daily is produced from a systematic algorithmic methodology that has a strong historical performance, which it does, and it's sort of not just a back test. It has a strong in production, if you like, performance. And the methodology, either won't have changed or may have been slightly improved, but it won't have suddenly, dramatically changed. So the assumption is that the only way this doesn't continue is if the market conditions change. And the reality is that often market conditions change. Like, people often think they lose edges overnight. Now, if it's very informational based, sometimes that can sort of happen. But if it's a case of how long before the market outmodels me, who's been good at modeling, that's a much more gradual change. And especially since David's Daily quite often bets into games and markets that are quite low limit types of markets. And so in those situations, you're not necessarily up against the most, hard hitting type environment. So it's safer to assume that nothing has changed, and the algorithm, we know historically, because we can look back, will have these losing runs.
Yeah.
And there's this principle that, essentially it very much feels like martingaling, right? We're losing, so we should double up kind of thing.
Exactly.
I very much was like, always, if anything, so financial trading kind of one-on-one, double up on your winners, halve your, cut your losers. So the idea is the market goes against you, it's telling you you're wrong, cut the trade. Market goes with you, don't just ride the trade, but, press your advantage, market's agreeing with you. So this is interesting, which brings you to another interesting little thing is someone sends you a tip through at 10-1, right? Drifts to 11-1, you're like, oh, bonus, bigger price. Goes to 8-1. Literally, the market's telling you, I agree with the person who sent you this tip, but you don't have the bet because it's now 8-1. Now, you may say, well, that person has priced it up at like 8-1, so there's no value in it. Anyway, so, but, it's one of these things where, the person could be right on average, but let's look at the times the market agreed with them. Were they actually more right than they realized? Anyway, yeah, so what came to me thinking about the, doubling down on losing runs was I actually read a piece talking about high frequency trading strategies in finance who had established systematic trading systems that literally had expected ROIs that they believed were, so computationally processed and accurate that they could actually adjust the staking of the fund based on when they had a period of negative variance, there was a predictability in variance regressing to normal variance, and therefore you could actually exploit this. It became a trading signal. Your own performance became a trading signal in a system of trading signals.
Wow.
And I still to this day look at that and think to myself, is that clever fuckers trying to be too clever?
Yeah.
But I heard about it, I read it, and I sort of had it on reasonable authority that this was being employed by some people. Now, it also sounds very much like the kind of thing that blows up a hedge fund in a few years' time and we read all about it.
Yeah.
But I was intrigued by it, and it brought me all the way back because we were at the Smart Bash and the Smart Betting Club back when it was the secret betting club, but Pete Ling was still in charge. There was a tipster who was in the Hall of Fame for them for many, many years. Wayne had a service called Northern Monkey Punter, and his was a classic, big-priced horse racing tipping service, and he was good. I don't know if he still don't think he does still do it, but it's very good. And he had multiple years of success. And he would go through periods where he'd go on extended losing runs, such was the nature of the prices. The membership would just halve, and then suddenly he'd go on the winning run, and suddenly he'd be riding high again, and members would start subscribing again. And you thought to yourself, well, this literally is the perfect example of the sort of dumb money cognitive biases that we as smart bettors are trying to exploit. These people are literally showing you, look, when they're afraid, that's the time you should be fearless. Sort of this sort of Buffett style kind of investing. It's like is Wayne still picking horses the same way he always has? And he was one of these people that was very clear that the method hasn't changed. I still do what I do. I don't see any reason why it shouldn't work. Carry on doing it. And he must have ridden out, I remember reading the magazines all through the period, he must have ridden out so many of these swings, and he must have seen must have been the biggest, tilt for him must have been his earnings, must have had such volatility because the subscribers would just come and go based this kind of volatility of his own record. So everyone's there going oh, tipster, consistent income and compared to betting. Yeah. There's still quite a lot of volatility with subscribers dropping and coming back. And so I thought to myself, well, there's this thing, maybe if the Smart Betting Club started to tell people this thing is just algorithmic, it just does what it does. It's funny because if you are on a really downward trend on some sort of value betting strategy, comparing the exchanges versus recreational bookmakers, and you're having a really tough time of it, if you ask yourself, well, has the exchange got dumber and the square bookmakers all got better than it? It's well, no, that's not happened. So surely this will turn around. And you're well, I don't know when it will turn around. True. But there is still this essence of, I still believe it will turn around. So could I maybe preempt the turnaround by it's also ratchet staking. So you hear people I scale my bank and I scale my bank down when I have, a strategy. Let's say I set aside £500 to bet this strategy. And as the bank builds, I want to increase stakes. But I have a ratchet, so I don't drop the stakes when I go into a losing run because, losing 10% versus getting back, if you lose 10%, gaining back 10% doesn't get you back to even kind of thing. So there's a lot of sort of psychology / it always feels very counterintuitively wrong, these kind of discussions. The craziest example I have seen of this, I don't even know if it would be quite crazy, but there's a guy who has an app, I believe he still runs it, and it looks at Betfair historical analysis of basically odds bracketed horses. And it's okay, in its purest form, the 2.0 shots on Betfair SP, on average, should win 50% of the time. Over the last 200 runners, 30 have won. So quite literally, we're due some winners if Betfair SP is correct. So please, the system now shows you, this app will show you basically where Betfair SP's reality to prediction is deviated sufficiently. Just think to yourself, that cannot fucking work. Because otherwise someone would be bazillionaires because it'd be so easy to program and do. And yet at the same time, there's another part of me that thinks, I know. Well, it has to regress at some point, doesn't it? And that it's reality is that you just don't know when it will regress.
Yeah.
And it's sort of one of these things. But like, I do think that there is an element of, if ever if ever someone does like a discount on a tipster or a system or whatever because it's gone through a bad run, I am always tempted to I'm always interested in systems when they are having a bad run. I remember that, again, just to sort of, I'm not to advertising too much, but the Smart Betting Club currently has a tipster that provides tips on. It's not virtual football; it's the e-football, I suppose, the sort of FIFA-style games footballs, and it's algorithmic. It generates billions of bets. Wow. And they said every time there's like a new game update, the bookmakers generally will either overestimate or underestimate the total goals in the game going forward. And so we will then have a consistent large amount of underbets or overbets while our algorithm catches up with new data points. And these are often represent losing periods. They're saying this, and it makes sense to me. They said we have losing periods, and then what happens is we correct faster than the bookmaker, and then we go through prolonged high winning periods. This is the nature of our volatility. This is the shape of our volatility. And I thought to myself, that's really interesting, because then, of course, the instinct is, well, how the fuck can I not have any losing bets and only place the winning bets then, please? And it's like, but I looked at this, and again, this idea that I shared with you, it comes back to me again. I'm thinking, can we use the drawdown? Because the idea is that wouldn't it be great if when you're in your worst possible drawdown, thinking, what a time to be alive. Only good things can come from here. This is the best time to be. And of course, it's like when you look at back tests, and it's like they say double the worst drawdown from the back test, because that's more likely what you'll see in the future. And it's incredible how often doubling in a bit more is actually quite close to the drawdown you will end up experiencing if you do it long enough. But yeah, it is sort of there's something sort of slightly mad and sick in a pleasurable way, like the idea of like, I'm really done my bollocks here. Yeah. Time to fucking level up. Time to leverage up the bets.
Let the good times roll. So I've put out 2,500 bets in the last 12 months on David's Daily. If you like, after this call, I'll send you them all. And if you can find any, you can look at the drawdowns. You can see that, like, June was one of the worst months. July was one of the best months. If you can see anything in there, you're welcome to use it and share it with me, perhaps.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always I suppose the only thing I would say concretely that we can be taken away is, in the same way, if you go on a bad run, as long as the process remains the same and you don't see any reason why not to carry on, you should carry on. And it's one of those things where if you find a tipster who can navigate, or system or algorithm, whatever, that can sort of navigate those hard runs emotionlessly, there's no reason why you shouldn't consider going to someone who looks like they've lost their edge. Because if we look back at the greatest speculators of all time will look like they've lost their edge at some point for a period of time. And you trust in their process.
It's coupling the trust element anyway with looking at a tough run of results. Then it compounds the lack of trust for people who don't know enough about it. Okay, so what about if I was to ask you a single question that you could ask someone that would reveal to you how much they know about sports betting? Is there a single question you could put to someone?
I suppose its most basic is like, just basically around how do you find your bets, or how do you know what a good bet is, or these kind of things. And then it doesn't have to be like, I have this model. It doesn't. These conversations don't have to start with that, but there just has to be a sign of a process, and then you can evaluate the cognitive power behind that process. If it's your nan and she says, I picked the one with the the best colors on the horse race, then okay, I can evaluate that. And if someone says, well, I only like to bet things where my model makes the probability higher than the odds or whatever, you can be like, okay, well, you're already at this level. So it's more about just like, how do you find your bets, how do you select your bets, already reveals so much about you, I would say.
I watched your interview with Simon Knott. I think you've done a few. This one you'd had 50 quid bet at the Star Sports office. Now, was that cash? Was that a cash bet?
Yeah. It was
50 quid cash. So was that the last time you bet in cash? Because I think you were quite an advocate for cash betting. You were back then when I heard you talking. But
yeah,
when
no, I'm very much I'm very much an advocate for trying to spend your money the way you want to spend it. I suppose that makes you sound like a libertarian nutter nowadays, doesn't it? But that's generally my belief. I'm a cryptocurrency advocate. I'm an advocate for the ability to use cash and be able to pay in cash. Money itself isn't inherently evil. It's it's the people who use it. So I don't sort of I think a lot of people sort of argue from the kind of, what about 85-year-old Doris who still wants to use cash because she's old or whatever, and it's like that's not people. If you use that argument, people will just say, well, Doris is going to fucking die, so soon it won't be a factor. It's like, don't make that the argument, because eventually all the people who fall into that category disappear. For me, it's just the idea is that once the cash is in my hand, and I've managed to actually extricate it from the clutches of my bank, I can transact with it how I see fit without interference, I suppose.
So when was the last time you had a bet in a high street book apart from that one?
Probably the Masters this year, I'd say.
Okay.
And that was very much a sort of on the instinct kind of thing. I checked the price on my phone before going in.
Yeah.
But yeah. But there's a large Paddy Power in Brighton, so and they often do sort of good promotional stuff around big events. So I just popped in as sort of because I've recently moved down to Brighton. It was kind of well, you've got to christen your area, haven't you? Yeah. And got to get on some CCTV somewhere if you can. So.
Yeah. So I also heard a nice phrase you used. It was real sicko stuff, dealing with like drawdowns of like high odds variants. Like not everyone can sort of be comfortable with that stuff. But is there anything that you could advise your younger self, the 15-year-old that's just stepping away from your grandfather, about to go and take this top trump skills, put them into practice? What would the advice be to that 15-year-old that you know now?
I mean, this is sort of a life thing rather than a betting thing, but to thine self be true. I admire people with this immense mental fortitude, even if some of it is almost a degree of chemical configuration and balance almost in the brain. But I've always admired those people with huge risk appetites, because so much of human history has been advanced by people taking asymmetric risks. So I've always admired that. But I wish I had, from an early point, been more at peace with the fact that if that's not you, it's okay. You don't have to try, because trying to emulate high risk appetite when you don't have it yourself, that is fucking disastrous. Genuinely terrible. So if you're not comfortable with it, I would say always try and let yourself butt up to the edges of these things. Don't let yourself become so timid that you don't do anything. But don't immediately look at like the true like lions of risk taking out there and think, I've got to try and be that. It's like just so much reward comes from taking on extra risk. So try to take on a little extra risk and feel comfortable sort of like working, like going to the gym, like working it like a muscle. Always evaluate it. If it pays off for you, what went well? Again, not just embedding everything. I went to the club and I just sat in the corner. I didn't talk to anyone. How did that go for you? It didn't go great. What happened next time? Well, I told myself I want to talk to at least 2 people. I tried that. One person threw a drink over me, and the other person said, "Oh, that sounds like you got a drink too. Shall I buy you another one?" It's like, "Oh, well, that turned out well." I got, like whatever, got chatting to them. There's this thing where, I think I very much was so eager to impress, so easy to emulate those people I admired, and you can kind of lose yourself a little bit in that. And you've got to strike the balance of pushing your own growth, but also knowing who you are. So yeah, the young version of me, when they came to London and met all these huge personalities in the betting industry, he just wanted to be like them. And the reality is that just be you and try and work on the edges of you and improving them, I would say.
Well, I mean, I think that's perfect, and you've certainly found your niche, and via many different things. So, what do you spend most of your time doing now?
So right now, I run my own little consultancy business, and I consult on, I suppose, all aspects of pricing and risk management. And as many people ask me, like, how's this working out? Like, I say that I am available to be hired by those on both sides of the counter. So people, betting syndicates potentially, or bookmakers. And the reality is that there's such a sort of you'd think it's not two sides of the same coin. How I tell a bookmaker to make a better product, to make more money from a trading perspective, is not the same as the inverse of how I would advise a syndicate to make more money. So I think a lot of people feel like surely you can't play both sides.
Yeah.
But the way bookmakers are operating their business now, it's kind of, I think people think like, oh, what you do when you talk to bookmakers, you tell them how to stop syndicates betting to them. It's like, no, that's not the way for them to make a lot more money. Actually, that's shutting a potential leak like that is actually minor compared to sort of more structural changes they can make. And by the same token, with syndicates, like, oh, do you just tell them how to get around the player profiling of bookmakers? Like, no, that's not the way that they will, sort of necessarily scale up. So it's it's basically people bring hopefully to me interesting trading and risk management type problems that I get to think about and sort of give my ideas on. And it's been a so far a wide variety of people and problems presented to me, which is the way I like it.
Yeah. So you left Twitter, I know, I don't know, about a year, 6 months ago, but we just launched our website, and you were very kind in endorsing it without even knowing who we were, which was very well appreciated by everyone here. But from seeing the website, this is the chance I asked my guests to plug my website. Is there anything on the site that you remember that you were particularly fond of, or that you would like to see changed?
Well, I never would ever want to force your hand at all on any of this. But I remember when I very first came to the website, you had probabilities on the horse racing cards, and they became sharp ratings.
They did.
And I remember thinking to myself, is this a way to conceal IP, or is this simply Joe Public would prefer to see just a rating out of 10, and that's easier?
That one.
So I did think to myself, yes, again, Netflix algorithm, tell me how many people liked this, not any percentage. But no, I think I really like the race cards a lot, and I like the Telegram. I mean, hands up, I just use the free Telegram. Sorry. But I just love the fact that when I'm like idle, I can just click the latest picks on the Telegram, and it spits out bets. But no, I really like a lot of it. The only thing I'd say is that I always become greedy in that if I'm looking at the race cards, I'm then thinking to myself, oh, have I got to go somewhere else to get the result? And how long do I have to wait for the result on these things? And I always think to myself, oh, maybe they could also tell me, because then I go to the Timeform website to find out what price it went to in running on Betfair. And then I think so I then become like greedy for more and more stuff.
Yeah.
And stuff bloats and confuses and loads up on websites. But I guess I'm always that kind of one website to rule them all would be lovely. But as it is right now, I feel like I love the way that I can filter certain factors to create a list of bets. It's really nice if you want to place, if you have a bookmaker who gives you some sort of bonus when you have a certain number of selections in your horse racing bets, like a lucky 15 bonus, whatever. I can then just go and filter and say, oh, show me 5 horses that meet these criteria, or keep filtering till I get to that number of horses, or I can filter for just a meeting. So if I'm at the races for the day, I'm at Royal Ascot, right? Just click for Ascot, show me the bets here. I think, you know, a lot of it is, it still works very quickly, right? And that's hugely valuable. There doesn't seem to be any, you know, you don't jam it up with, you know, animation or anything that sort of clunks it up. So yeah, so I'm pretty happy with it at the moment. Yeah, I'm always intrigued as to how, so the market mover stuff. So currently you take timestamps and you show price movement between the timestamps that you've taken. So you think you do an overnight kind of drop, maybe a morning drop, and then something, I can't remember what it is. I always think to myself, so if you look at something like At the Races website, they have a dropping and drifting, a sort of a steaming and drifting kind of index. So they've tried to create more quantifiable element to, you know, what is a real steamer, let's call it, or a real drifter kind of thing. And I always feel like with that market information, you know, how can we evaluate that information even more? Like, did it drop dramatically? Did it slowly drop? All these kind of things. But this is all kind of stuff where, you know, if you feel like people are already getting value from the product, will it add more value or will it confuse the issue? So it's tough. But I'm like one of those things where I'm just endlessly, I'm like a product builder's nightmare at companies, because like, it's like, anyone got any ideas for any features? No. Oh, Matthew, 20 new features. Is it great? Thanks very much. You know, like I'm that guy. So,
but you're also that guy so I forgot that we had percentages before the ratings. It's now a sharp 10 rating for every horse, and the percentage lasted about 6 hours before we changed it because of the feedback with so many questions. But your feedback is, I wanted the percentages because I wanted more information, but I also get why you changed it. So
oh, absolutely. I mean, because to me, you know, I think my next question, you know, would have been, you know, probably, oh, any chance that you can just show the delta between your predicted percentage and the available odds? So it's really easy. Like, we make this 3% implied probability difference or whatever. And, you know, then I can just sort by the ones that, you know, you make the biggest difference between. Because there is this element of like a sharp 10 rating where the next best horse is a 9 in a 8-runner race, and then there's a sharp bet rating 10, next horse is a 6 in a 20-runner race. You know, if someone asked you which is the better bet, I'd have a stab at it, but the probabilities does sort of that actually forces a number on what is in theory the better bet.
It does, but then it also encourages people to use it to plug it into Kelly strategies and to actually be a tip rather than a rating. And so it's so subtle. And also, when you said you were the first to give us that piece of feedback, and we're like, oh, we've only just changed it, and Trent says it's better how it was. That wasn't the wording, but you said, oh, I liked it how it was. And then we thought we're going to get an avalanche of people saying the same thing, and it didn't. Not everyone, but, you know, 95% of feedback is rating over percentage. But it's that whole balance of like, what is the most easy to understand and get value from versus something that really takes a lot of time to understand. So, and we're learning every month. We do an upgrade and we improve on those things.
The other thing that sort of that I'd love, because I would understand that it's not a negative, is like, so for example, if someone told me over the last 12 months, if you had blindly backed at SP all 10 rated, you would have lost this amount, because you're betting at SP, you're blindly backing something, you should lose money, but you have the data to contextualize that. Like, if you had blindly bet the favorite, you would have lost, you know, 10%. However, if you blindly backed the sharp 10 rating, you'd only have lost 5%. This should be headline news. This should be like, fucking hell, that rating system's done well. It's beaten, you know, the lowest losing strategy of just blindly back the favorite. You know, it's outperformed that. So the rating therefore has value. Instead, the headline for everyone else is, well, this piece of shit just loses 5%. Why the fuck would I use it? You know, so it's just, there's data that I would love to see, like catalog data from the output of the site, that I could then realize, because of the way I think, oh, that is actually still very good. But unfortunately, it's like if someone said like, oh, if you back the favorite, blindly, you lose this percent. But if you back the favorite when they're also the time form rating top favorite, you only lose this there. Time form can never show that, because it just like says, people go like, fucking hell, I thought backing the top time favorite was going to pay off in the end, and I was going to be a winner in the end. And as it turns out that, so unfortunately, you're sort of caught between doing. This is the problem when you try to do well, not try, but when you are executing stuff that has genuine like IP in it and genuine market value, but also you're trying to provide something that provides customer satisfaction. And customer satisfaction isn't always translatable into making money, even within betting products. That's the sort of incredible thing.
I think that's the niche among the betting community. Actually, wanting to make money is actually the rare like person rather than the norm. So that's brilliant, Trench. Like, my final question that I ask everyone, and I'm sure you've been asked it a million times, but I'm interested in your answer, so I'm going to ask it again. If I was to offer you 5-1, heads or tails, a fair coin right now, no tricks, no magician stuff, fair coin, 5-1, unlimited stake, what's your decision?
As a percentage of my available,
a flat number, £1, £1 million, anything in between.
Oh, but who's giving me the money, so to speak, is what I'm saying. Is this just someone?
Your money.
Oh, my money.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Oh, right. Oh, sorry. Yeah. It was just arbitrary. Like, how much money would you have in this? Right? All the money, please. No, I would. So if it's 5-1, you know how I literally, how I do this is, in this situation, even though whatever Kelly says, blah blah blah, 5-1, what 6 is decimal, 18% implied RI. I would basically look at what I have available to me, liquid, and I would have 18% of it on that bet.
Would you?
So that is a very simplistic way of looking at that particular question.
That's a big bet.
That is a big bet. But it's a bit. When I've said liquid. I'm not selling property. If I don't own a property. But like, I'm not like cashing in my pension to do this. No. But I am looking around all the liquid assets I have.
Yeah.
And I think in that instance I would be I would take that opportunity.
Interesting. It's a lot more.
However, I'm not on the streets, and I'm not begging for food or whatever. And so every context is king, right?
It would still hurt. That would sting. Like a 50% chance. That would be hard to.
Absolutely.
It'd be rice and water.
I don't even know off the top of my head what the Kelly suggestion is for that. What is the stake for Kelly for that?
Wouldn't it be like, if something absurd, like far too much?
Yeah, I'm sure it'd be massive.
It'd be like.
I feel like I should know that off the top of my head, but I don't.
Yeah, so do I. But all I know, it would be too much.
What are you in? You sort of in the 5%, 10% range, or?
No, I don't know what the percentage. I probably have 10 grand. That's my answer.
You see, that's more than 80%. No, that's already a bigger bet than me. But no, it's No, I mean that still hurts losing that, right?
That would hurt, but it would be the amount that I'd be willing to take up that opportunity that wouldn't come around very often. So that's my number.
It's got to be enough. It's got to be enough money that I can make it a good podcast story, right? So if it ever does happen to me,
and it goes back to your grandfather an hour and a half ago. It's got to be a punch in the face if you lose. That's what it's got to feel like.
Yeah, that would definitely be a punch in the face.
Yeah. All right, Trench, brilliant. I'll put your. Where is the best place if you're not on Twitter anymore to link you up in the description?
Very much LinkedIn. Although, if you know someone who knows me, do feel free to, vast amount of my contacts come through people who I know who say, oh, so-and-so would like to get in contact with you. Is that okay?
Yeah.
I invariably say yes. So if you know someone that knows me, happily go through them. But if you're watching this and you know no one who knows me, then I am under my own name on LinkedIn, and I will, respond to all the messages I receive there.
Get yourself back on X, Twitter. It's a lovely place at the moment.
Yeah, it's funny. Most of my previous departures were because I was very upset and sort of angry over something or whatever it was. And this most recent, I just left because I was enjoying it, believe it or
Yeah,
not.
yeah,
And I was just always on it, and I was quite enjoying the interactions I was having. And I was launching I just left a salaried work to set up a business for myself. And I
yeah,
thought, do you know what? I probably shouldn't be spending 6 hours doom scrolling this shit.
yeah,
And so I came off out of really puritanical, altruistic reasons. Um, but then I have now I'm thinking to myself, oh, I should people you can still click on random accounts through people send me links and
yeah.
you can still kind of see what the tweet was. So
Oh,
I see stuff that
yeah,
people send me. But yeah, I don't, nothing has me I'm not lying awake wishing I was back on it necessarily. But at
no,
the
that's
same time
good.
I kind of lost my I used to absolutely I used to get so wound up. It's like the
Yeah,
meme, like, sorry, honey, I can't come to bed. There's someone wrong on the internet who I need to
yeah.
correct. And like, I was just that person and I couldn't deal with
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
I can deal with it now, but also now I'm trying to use time productively or whatever. So
I've got the Djokovic level of whatever's happened before. Forget about it. Don't worry
oh,
about it. Someone comes at me. I'm like, cool. I get DMs saying, "Why'd you respond to that guy?" I was like, "What guy? I've forgotten about him already." Doesn't matter. It's like water off a duck's back. Doesn't matter. God, got better things to do.
you're the perfect mindset for X, then, that's for sure.
Yeah, yeah. No, I kind of like, yeah, I kind of feel, yeah, I feel it's like it's not a fair fight when people come at trolling me saying I'm like making stuff up. I'm like everything is documented. Like you're not going to win this one, but all good fun. All right, Trench, brilliant. Thanks a lot for your time. Hour and a half, perfect. Hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Awesome. Thank you, David.
Cheers then. Bye bye.